Today we're diving into a classic David versus Goliath story, but with a serious tech twist. We're talking the NFL, a media giant, up against a few local bar owners armed with a brand new piece of tech, the satellite dish. This is the story of the blackout heist.
So let's just jump right in with the question that started this whole mess. It's game day. Your local team's game is blacked out on TV because the stadium didn't sell out. But then you walk into your favorite sports bar and boom, there it is on the screen. How? And the million-dollar question, is that even legal? That's the exact problem the courts had to tackle.
All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll meet the players. Then we'll get into the technology, how this was even possible. After that, we'll jump into the courtroom drama, break down the final ruling, and finally, talk about why a case from the 1980s still matters so much today.
Okay, let's set the stage and meet the teams in this legal showdown.
So for all you sport law students out there, here's the official case file. This is National Football League versus McBee and Bruno's Incorporated. In one corner, we have the plaintiffs, the NFL, and, at the time, the St. Louis Cardinals. And in the other corner, the defendants, a group of local St. Louis restaurant owners. The decision we're digging into today comes from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. And if you want to look it up, the citation is 792 F.2D 726.
So what was the fight really about? Well, it was a clash of business models. The NFL had this blackout rule. If a home game wasn't a sellout, they wouldn't let local TV stations air it. The idea was to pressure fans into buying tickets. But the local bars, who, needed those fans on game day, found a workaround. They bought these newfangled satellite dishes and literally pulled the game's signal out of thin air, completely sidestepping the blackout.
Let's move on and talk about that signal in the sky, because understanding the tech here is absolutely key to understanding the legal fight that followed.
All right, the most important term you need to know is the clean feed. Now, this wasn't the broadcast you saw at home. Think of it as the raw, unfiltered video and audio straight from the stadium's cameras and mics. It was just the game. No commercials, no halftime show, no CBS or NBC logo in the corner. Just pure football. And that was a signal the bars were snagging.
This chart really shows you the whole journey. So the game gets filmed, then it's sent up to a satellite as that raw, clean feed. It gets beamed down to the network's headquarters, where they slice in all the commercials and add the graphics. That creates the dirty feed. Then that finished product gets sent back up to the satellite and finally down to all the local TV stations. The bars were just intercepting the signal way back at step 2, before it was ever meant for public consumption.
So now that we've got the tech down, let's see how this whole thing just exploded in the courtroom. This is the copyright collision.
The NFL basically came in swinging with a two-punch combo. Their main cause of action was copyright infringement. They argued the bars were performing their copyrighted broadcast without permission. And on top of that, they claimed the bars were violating the Federal Communications Act by intercepting a private satellite signal.
And here's where the legal showdown really gets good. The NFL's claim was pretty straightforward. Hey, that game is our copyrighted property. Showing it in your bar to make money is a public performance, and only we have the right to do that. But the bars had a really clever defense. They pointed to a little loophole in the Copyright Act called the home use exemption. They basically argued, look, this is no different than having a regular TV on in our bar, and that satellite dish, it's just a fancy antenna. So everything, the entire defense, hinged on this one little phrase from the law. Did a satellite dish system count as a receiving apparatus of a kind commonly used in private homes? It's just a perfect example of how an entire multi-million-dollar legal battle can come down to how you define a few simple words, especially when the law is trying to play catch-up with technology.
So how did the court untangle this mess? Let's move on and decode the final ruling.
And the court's decision was pretty blunt. The NFL won. The Court of Appeals sided with the league and said the permanent injunction stands. The bars had to stop showing the games. But the real story isn't just who won, it's why. So remember that whole home use argument the bars were making? Well, it pretty much fell apart because of this number. Back in 1986, a satellite dish system would set you back more than $1,500. You could buy a really nice TV for a fraction of that. The court looked at that price tag, saw that very few people actually owned one, and said, yeah, no, this is not commonly used in private homes. And just like that, the bar's main defense was toast. So to break down the court's logic a little more, first, they said that when someone infringes a copyright to make money, the court just assumes it's causing irreparable harm to the owner. Second, like we just saw, the dishes were way too expensive and rare to be considered common home equipment. Third, they totally shot down the clean feed versus dirty feed idea, saying the copyrighted thing was the game itself. It didn't matter what stage of production it was in. And finally, the court agreed the NFL could get an injunction for future games too, since everyone knew the schedule in advance.
But here's where it gets really nuanced. This wasn't a total sweep for the NFL. The court looked at each bar individually. For most of them, like McBee and Bruno's, the injunction was upheld. But for 2 of the bars, it was thrown out. Why? Well, in one case, the evidence showed only the owner and a couple buddies were watching. That's not a public performance. And the other bar had actually picked up a legal broadcast from a TV station in another city. It's such a great lesson. In the law, the specific facts for each defendant are everything.
So, okay, a case from the 80s about giant satellite dishes. Why should we care today? Well, let's talk about the legacy of this case, because it's still incredibly relevant. This case gives us some huge takeaways. First, it proved that copyright law is flexible enough to handle new technologies. It also slammed home how important that term public performances is for any business that has a TV. But maybe the most fascinating insight is that the definition of common technology is always in flux. What was exotic and expensive in 1986 is standard today. At the end of the day, though, the core conflict, the fight to control valuable content, is a battle that never, ever ends. And that really brings us to today. The technology has changed, right? We've gone from huge, expensive satellite dishes to global streaming services and VPNs that can make it look like you're anywhere in the world. The tools to get around a blackout are way more powerful and in everyone's hands now. The core conflict is identical. So I'll leave you with this question. In our modern on-demand world, is the very idea of a local TV blackout completely obsolete?